What's up, guys? Raziel here for part 2 of the series Final Fantasy XIV versus World of Warcraft in 2020. And this one has quite a large chunk of meat to bite into. A lot of stuff to talk about in this part 2 and wrap up the series here. Also, if you haven't seen the first part of the series, I highly recommend you watch that first. The link to that video will be in the description down below. As always, my friends, feel free to comment. Tell me your disagreements, your agreements, and as always, go fuck yourself. And let's go ahead and let's just get started.
I am Raziel.
All right, let's just jump right into this because we have a lot to tackle here. First and foremost, community. Now, MMO communities are quite different from other online game communities such as Call of Duty and others, shitholes like that. But one unfortunate truth we have to face with all online gaming is as the game becomes more accessible and is pandered to more gaming demographics, the overall community gets tainted to a degree. I'm going to go ahead and start with Final Fantasy XIV on this one. Final Fantasy XIV definitely has a more helpful community. I said this all the way back in one of my first Final Fantasy videos, and I still stick by it. World of Warcraft, has it's kind of a shithole. Let's be honest. But both games have pricks or assholes and pieces of shit. Both have elitists. Both have a bunch of retards that can't find the WASD keys, and they can't even find their own asshole. And so they just keyboard turnaround and are just terrible players in general, and if you say anything to try to help them, will shit all over in your cereal. But there's one big difference. The group of really big shitbirds in World of Warcraft is the neckbeards, and in Final Fantasy XIV I wouldn't necessarily call them shitbags, but the core concentrated group of its community are weebs or weeaboos. If you don't know what that is, just go research it. I'm not your goddamn encyclopedia. But I'd say overall, Final Fantasy XIV has the best community between the two games. They're more helpful, they're less toxic overall, and they genuinely, really, try to help each other out. However, because of changes made more recently to Square Enix's terms of service, and they monitor chat so much more closely, so you can pretty much be banned for saying anything, even if it's in a joke. So it's definitely starting to go more into the SJW direction with enforcement of things you say. While in World of Warcraft, people are just so shitty in general, and so many people have Blizzard's known this for so long that you're not really going to get banned. You're just going to get blocked and maybe muted for 24 hours if you are spouting racist shit or something in the chat. But here's my advice to everyone watching, because Final Fantasy XIV is great now compared to other MMOs, but it is slowly going in the same direction WoW did, because when World of Warcraft first released, the community was fantastic and helpful. World of Warcraft now is a 16-year-old game. Final Fantasy XIV 2.0 and beyond is a 9-year-old game. So what I suggest is be the change in the community and be the type of person in the community that you would want to interact with. I've already started practicing this and bringing kind of how I talk to other people in Final Fantasy XIV. Now that I've started playing WoW again, I bring it over there. And instead of relying on everybody else to be the good community member and treat you with respect, I'm doing that in turns. Sure, I still talk lots of shit behind their back. Who fucking doesn't? I'm just behind my computer thinking, wow, that guy's really fucking garbage. But I'm not going to just message them and say that. So be the positive change would be my advice. That's it for community. If I have to give a rating, I would say Final Fantasy XIV wins this round. They have a better community than World of Warcraft does, hands down. Moving on to the next thing, leveling. Now, I wanted to approach this topic from the angle of a brand new player just starting out on the game, because let's face it, at this point in MMOs, leveling is just a means to an end, especially in theme park MMOs. where the vast majority of the content is the destination and not the journey. I've made a video about that, but it's Endgame, what you do at level cap. So people generally tend to rush to level cap as fast as possible. So let's just say leveling for a brand new player, we're going to compare the experiences. Both games have their stories intertwined with the leveling system. World of Warcraft's right now is a mess. Final Fantasy XIV right now has a very stunning narrative, but it's very, very padded and very long. So in general, someone who plays Final Fantasy XIV the first time through is really, really going to enjoy their leveling experience. But at the same time, nobody wants to re-level and go through the entire story all over again. It just takes too goddamn long. While with World of Warcraft, you don't really even see the shambles of a story that are there because you level through it so quickly. You get to max level so fast, especially with heirloom gear and things like that. Which now Final Fantasy XIV is starting to go down that same route as well, with the experience bonus helmet, earrings, and whatnot. Both give you experience bonuses for being in a guild or a free company. So how do we define which leveling is better? Because something else we need to mention are the changes coming to leveling. Now with Final Fantasy XIV, for a long time, the biggest barrier for a new player was all the post 2.0, pre 3.0 quests that were introduced in patches. Between, in the patch cycles at the end of the endgame experience of the original 2.0 Realm Reborn and before the Heavensward expansion questline, Final Fantasy XIV's first expansion. And so that was a huge barrier because it was over 100 quests that were just monotonous as fuck and annoying. But with a future patch coming out for Final Fantasy XIV 5.3, they are releasing a bunch of changes to that entire system to make it so much faster. They're removing a lot of quests. They're changing a bunch of quests. They're improving experience gained for those endgame quests. So that experience is likely to change dramatically for new players and returning players alike. And what World of Warcraft is doing, which I think is absolutely, I'm going to give Blizzard credit here, even though I haven't experienced what the system is like yet. Just from its description in Shadowlands, it's coming out, is going to be fantastic. Where when you make a new character, the first 10 levels is going to be in a new starter zone, and then which is level 1 through 10. Then level 10 through 50 is you get to pick whatever storyline expansion you want to play. Wrath of the Lich King, Mists of Pandaria, Burning Crusade, so on and so forth. We all know you won't pick Warlords or Draenor because that's a fucking anal tumor. But as you finish that, you get to experience the entire expansion story. And then the last 10 levels, you'll do the latest expansion, Shadowlands, from 50 to 60. So I think that's really, really awesome. And if you choose, you can even opt out of that and just level up the old way by skipping through a bunch of expansions and all kinds of other things. So both games are getting a serious revamp to the leveling experience. At this point right now in time, I would say the leveling experience depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to see a story, if the narrative's important to you, and that sort of thing, then I would say Final Fantasy XIV has a better leveling experience. If you want to get through it, you don't care about lore, you don't care about story, you just want to get to endgame to play with your friends as fast as humanly possible, then World of Warcraft is going to be a better leveling experience for you. I personally wouldn't trade the leveling experience that I did receive in Final Fantasy XIV, and at the same time, I would never want to do it over again. It's so long. So this one I'm going to leave up in the air for up to you, because I think both serve different ends, but at the end, they both are just a means to an end. And I'm really interested to see how World of Warcraft's new leveling experience works out. So I would say also, to cap it off, as I said before, if you are a player that's already been playing either game for a long period of time and you just want to make a new character, I would say World of Warcraft is a better living experience because you're just going to zip right through it. While if you want to do the same thing in Final Fantasy XIV, i.e. you've been playing for a long time but make a new character on a new server, the only way to get through it is to buy a leveling potion and a story skip potion, which those two prices together are the same, if not more, around the same cost as level, getting a free level 120 in World of Warcraft right now. I think the World of Warcraft's a bit more expensive, but yeah, that's the end of it. I give these two a tie in their leveling experience. They both have aspects that are great and both have aspects that really suck, and which one you think is better is going to depend on how you want to play the game. All right, coming up next, class customization and feel. And this one's a big one because both of these games are RPGs. Now, I'm going to start with World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft has quite a few classes. Hunter, Druid, DK, which is Death Knight, Warrior, Paladin, Rogue, Warlock, Mage, Monk, Shaman, Priest, Demon Hunter. And each one of these, with the exception of Demon Hunter, has 3 individual specializations that you can spec into. You can swap between them at any time you're out of combat, but that brings it up to a grand total of 35 different playstyles, as Demon Hunter only has 2 and not 3 trees. So 35 total playstyles you can pick between in World of Warcraft. Now, balance has always been an issue in every MMORPG, but Blizzard is especially bad at it at a lot of times. But I would definitely say that each class plays quite differently from the other specs in the same class. So they all have their own unique feel while staying true to the core class. And in Shadowlands coming up, more baseline abilities that were pruned in past expansions are being returned to the classes. And so we'll have to see how that plays out, whether that feels it'll blend the specs together a little bit more or make them more defined, but with their own unique niche still. Of course, over time, because WoW is a 16-year-old game, homogenization has occurred, and unfortunately, and this is true for all MMORPGs, roles like hybrids and support roles like that are kind of a thing in the past. Final Fantasy XIV used to have them quite heavily, and it's faded away from that game as well. But I will say this for World of Warcraft. While it's common for certain specs of classes to be undesired and not invited to raids and PvP and certain things, it's exceptionally rare for an entire class to be undesired. It has happened, it's not unheard of, but it's quite rare to where no spec of a class is good enough to do all the content in the game. Blizzard has actually done quite a good job with this. I think the last time I remember something being so bad on all specs was Warlock and Legion, but that got fixed, though it wasn't in a timely manner as far as I remember, if memory serves. I could be wrong. Tell me in the comments if you remember this. But anyway, my point still stands. It's a rare thing. Now, Final Fantasy XIV has 17 total playstyles because each class or job only has one role, one function. So there's Astrologian, Bard, Black Mage, Dark Knight, Dancer, Dragoon, Gunbreaker, Machinist, Monk, Ninja, Paladin, Red Mage, Samurai, Scholar, Summoner, Warrior, and White Mage. And now how jobs differ from classes is every single job plays quite different from all the other jobs. For example, Dark Knight may have some similar cooldowns to the other tanks like Paladin, Gunbreaker, Warrior, but they play quite differently. Ninja plays completely different, from, a monk. They're just quite different. They don't feel the same at all. But at the same time, none of these classes have subspecs. So every warrior is going to be identical to every other warrior and so on. And it actually isn't uncommon in Final Fantasy XIV for some entire jobs to be removed from being invited to things because they're bad. As I always say, and I've said several times, fuck the meta. I never play meta. If all you do is roll, the same, whatever class is flavor of the month, every time it gets buffed and the one you were playing before gets nerfed or whatever, then you're part of the problem. Go fuck yourself with a cactus.
That's really fucked up.
But other than that, yeah, it's not an uncommon thing for the meta to rule out entire jobs, even sometimes for almost an entire expansion. Even though all the jobs can do all the content. We saw that when Dark Knight when they thought it was mathematically impossible to kill Ultimate Ultima weapon when that fight first came out. It was done by Dark Knight, the first group to clear it, had one in there. So it can be done, it just took exceptional play. Now, in Final Fantasy XIV, here's one thing that's unique about the game, is you can switch to any job you have leveled up at any time, as long as you're not in an instance or in combat. Now, while this is great accessibility-wise, functionality-wise, and I see the whole reason they did this was so you didn't have to re-level the long-ass story, as we talked in the previous point, if you wanted to play a new job, a new class. But at the same time, it raises an issue. And the issue I have with it is that there's your character, and remember, Final Fantasy XIV is a deep-rooted narrative all the way from its foundation. Your character has no identity as the class or job, if that makes sense, because the story, the main overarching story, has nothing to do with your job or your class. Now, the game does have an entire quest line for every single job and class, and most of them are absolutely fantastic. Great narratives where you invest in the characters involved, and they're absolutely fantastic. In fact, WoW used to do this too back in Classic WoW, and they even tried it again with the Warlock Green Fire quest. I think that was during, can't remember what expansion it was during. It might have been Warlords or before, but you could get the Green Fire. Maybe it was Miss Pandaria. And it was really, really cool. I love it when they do class quests like that. And they did, WoW did it again in Legion, where you had a class hall. Every class had a big storyline for that class. And I think games need to stick with that. I love it when games do that. But to me, because this is an RPG and an overarching narrative, because you can switch jobs so easily in Final Fantasy XIV, I never really felt rooted in the job I loved the most, because it didn't feel like it was part of my character in the same way that it does in World of Warcraft. You know, you pick a Death Knight in World of Warcraft, you pick a warrior in World of Warcraft, and that is your character. It's part of who they are. So with class customization and feel, they're pretty close. Both games do, I think, an exceptional job, but I would have to give the slight edge to World of Warcraft in this case, because I feel more tied to my character in World of Warcraft, and maybe it's because I've been playing, you know, a Death Knight for 14 years plus, but I like that there are different specs I can switch between, and you know, that it's not such a huge hassle if I want to play another class to just reroll another character and have that be that character's identity. So I'm going to give the edge to World of Warcraft here, but by no means am I saying Final Fantasy XIV is bad. Even though we are seeing now Final Fantasy XIV start to go in the same direction of homogenization that WoW did way back in the day, and at this point with Shadowlands, WoW is kind of turning back the clock and giving abilities back. So I certainly hope that Square learns from that and doesn't repeat the same mistake. Okay. This is another big one, combat. And with combat is going to come the actual systems that surround combat. And this may take a bit, so saddle the fuck up. The first thing we're going to talk about and compare, global cooldown. World of Warcraft has a significantly shorter global cooldown, or GCD, than Final Fantasy XIV. Now, Final Fantasy XIV's does get quicker as you get to max level and you get stats like skill speed or spell speed, things like that. But even at, you know, a skill speed capped out, like Samurai still won't touch the GCD of a fast World of Warcraft character such as a rogue or a monk. And so keep that in mind when you're deciding, if you haven't played either game, which one you're kind of looking at, which at this point, like, how the fuck have you not played either game? I mean, come on, Jesus Christ. But let's talk about how the global cooldown's biggest effect is because of server tick. Now, a lot of people don't know what server tick means. Server tick is how quickly the server responds to the packets your client is sending to the server. So, for example, the client will tell the server, send a packet saying the character's standing right here and just hit this ability, and then the server will take that information and match it up with what it's doing, and then send a signal back and confirm. That's why when you lag, for example, your client's not sending packets anymore. On the server, your character's standing still, but in game, you're like running in place, or you're running around all over, even though to everyone else looking at you, you're just frozen in place. Server tick plays a huge role in how animations work. So let's start with World of Warcraft. In World of Warcraft, the global cooldown is quite quickly, even though recently they did do some changes that made it so that your some abilities are on the GCD. So they didn't actually change the time of the GCD. They just took other abilities that used to not be on the global cooldown and put them on there. But they're keeping a close eye, and if certain abilities don't feel right on the GCD, they're removing them. They test them and remove them and put them back off the GCD. Though I think it's fair to say that Final Fantasy XIV deals with this in the exact same way. There's a bunch of abilities off global cooldown that you can just throw in between abilities that are on the global cooldown. Most MMORPGs work this way. However, where the two games differ is in World of Warcraft. For example, if an ability is launched at you by a boss and you see the indicator on the ground of where this ability is going to hit, that indicator is literally saying this is where it's going to hit. Don't be there when it hits. So you move out of the way, right? The animation hits the spot, and then you can go back after it clears out and you're safe. Which is how it works in real life too. If you knew a missile was you saw the shadow of a missile slowly coming at you from the sky and you moved out of it, the missile would hit. And if you had good cover at that point, you probably wouldn't get hurt. Final Fantasy XIV, on the other hand, it has a much longer global cooldown. One of the biggest problems with Final Fantasy XIV's combat is, especially for classes like Dragoon, is your animation lock. A lot of abilities have animation lock and some don't. What I mean by animation lock is you can't do another ability until the animation of the ability you're doing ends. Even if your GCD is back up, it won't let you. And that results in a lot of deaths for things like jumps and things like that Dragoon do, because they can't move to get out of an animation or a damaging attack that's incoming because they're stuck in an animation lock. WoW doesn't have this problem. There are no real animation locks in World of Warcraft, I think with the exception of the Warrior's Charge, or the Demon Hunter's Leap ability, Warrior's Leap, things like that. But it's so short, and some abilities you can still hit while in midair, so it's not the same. Another big issue is how that same scenario I just explained works in Final Fantasy XIV. You see the indicator, right? Saying, hey, an ability is going to hit here. You move out of it. Once the indicator disappears, your client takes a snapshot and sends it to the server. If your foot is in the marker still in that snapshot, you're fucked. You get hit. The animation, that the ability itself isn't what hits you. It's the warning sign that determines whether you get hit or not, which for a lot of players, especially coming from other MMOs, is a complete fucking mindfuck, and it kills them over and over and over again. It takes a lot of getting used to. It took me a long time to get used to. Is it the worst thing in the world? No. Does it suck ass? Yes. So as far as combat goes, the best way I can explain these two by comparison is World of Warcraft is very fast and responsive. So you have to, and I'm not talking about necessarily about you pressing the buttons and what you press responds. What I mean is you have to be ready as a player to respond to anything at the flip, turn of a hat, flip of a coin, bam, you got to be ready to just do it, get out of the way, move, right? Well, Final Fantasy XIV is slower, and it's very preparation based. You memorize things so that you don't get hit, as opposed to knee-jerk, I got to do this now because I made a mistake type of thing. So in combat, and I know I'm going to get some hate for this, but it's just my opinion. Again, if you can't take my opinion, go fuck yourself. But I give this one to World of Warcraft all the way. The combat in World of Warcraft flows much more smoothly, much quicker, and when you make mistakes, you can make good plays and respond to said plays. While on Final Fantasy XIV, if you make mistakes, you can recover if it didn't one-shot you, but if it doesn't, you're just fucked. You're just fucked end of the day. But that's my opinion. World of Warcraft wins in combat. All right, next point. The open world. Now, both games don't really have an open world in the same way that you would describe an open world in, say, a game like Skyrim or old MMOs like Asheron's Call or EverQuest. Both have instances. Both games have a lot of, like some barriers you have to go through to get a loading screen, things like that. Now, I'm going to hit World of Warcraft first. World of Warcraft has world quests, which evolved from daily quests. So you'll see all these indicators all over the world that you can fly to. So it is quite open, and you can just land in that spot or ride there if you don't have flying unlocked. Thanks, fucking Pathfinder. But you do these world quests. You can find treasure chests out in the world randomly, and things like that. There's invasions. There's PvP events where you kill. Open world PvP is a thing in World of Warcraft, though it's quite different than it was back in the vanilla days, but it's still there. Final Fantasy XIV's open world, and I'm just going to flat out say it, is practically dead. There are no real treasures you can just find out there unless you're doing treasure maps, which is an activity you can do in the open world, but it's more like a quest you do. You get people, get people in a group, and then you find a treasure map and then go to a certain place in the world, and if you're lucky, it opens a portal where you go into an instance. But every zone in Final Fantasy XIV has walled off barriers, areas you can't fly over. You can't. So, for example, if you want to fly from one area to another area, you still have to go through the same entrances and exits of the area that you would have to do if you were on foot. So, and there's a loading screen, loading you into the next area. I'm just being straight up honest here. World of Warcraft wins this one. World of Warcraft's open world isn't great. There's definitely games with far better, but what the open world that WoW does have is better than Final Fantasy XIV. It's literally the only thing else in the open world after you hit level cap in Final Fantasy XIV is Fates, which right now the rewards that you get from getting all the Fates isn't that great. So with the exception of some really rare Fates where you can get mounts from, but then you'll just see spam in the chat saying, hey, this monster spawned and everyone shows up, and then you all fuck off. It's not really organic things happening every day in the open world of Final Fantasy XIV, and it's been this way a long time. We thought the changes they made to Fates in Shadowbringers was going to change that, but it really didn't. It's still the same. Fates can help you level, but they're still not the fastest. Now that you can level up very quickly through Paths of the Dead and Heaven on High, your alternate jobs that way. So I have to give open world to World of Warcraft on this one. There's just a lot more going on. All right, Endgame PvP, or just PvP in general. And I know a lot of you people out there are really big on PvP and flexing your PvP-ness. So let's talk about PvP, and I'm going to start out with Final Fantasy XIV here. Both games do have PvP, but Final Fantasy XIV, and again, this is my opinion, I feel it's hamstrung by the server tick that we talked about earlier. Because of the slower paced combat, because of being, the snapshots the server takes kind of hamstringing your ability to be more reactive to things hitting you and coming in. And you have to plan more. PvP isn't super popular in Final Fantasy XIV. There is a niche hardcore group of people that do it because they do have arenas. They do have battlegrounds. Their big arena is called the Feast, and you can get some really fucking badass looking weapons and armor, for your glamour or transmog in Final Fantasy XIV. Some of the coolest shit is the PvP gear, but very few people do it. And Square has been in a constant battle to try to keep its PvP relevant and keep people interested, but it just fails over and over and over again. Me personally, I've never liked the PvP in Final Fantasy XIV, and the closest I did get to getting into it was when, for a while, it was discovered at the beginning of I can't remember if it was Shadowbringers. No, it was Stormblood, the expansion before, that you could level quite quickly from the experience you get in PvP. So a lot of people were doing it. Queues were really fast. But then Square's nerfed the shit out of that, and people stopped doing it again. So the PvP in Final Fantasy XIV, in my opinion, it exists, it's there. Square's constantly trying to improve it, but my opinion is it's always been terrible and not an enjoyable thing. There is no open world PvP. That's never been a thing in Final Fantasy. Now let's go on to World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft PvP has been around since the launch. It's World of Warcraft, 2 factions, orcs versus humans. It's the whole basis for the Warcraft universe. So, of course, World of Warcraft has arenas, battlegrounds, skirmishes, epic battlegrounds, rated battlegrounds. There's PvP you can just do casually and get some gear that way, which the gear is item level wise is comparable to PvE gear in a lot of situations. And then you can do competitive where you get really high item level gear, but it's, you know, quite hard. Blizzard is even trying to push it as an esport. Now, is World of Warcraft PvP good enough to be an esport? Hell fucking no. It's always been really imbalanced. There's always been like one-shot macros you can make for certain classes against certain classes, things like that. But PvP is going to get some revamps, again, for Shadowlands coming out this year. They're bringing back the original Conquest vendors, so instead of there being RNG involved in what pieces of gear you get when you win, you can save up and buy the pieces that are going to be the most effective and help you the most. Blizzard's been constantly adding things, taking things away from PvP, such as resilience and stats like that. Because right now in PvP, the gear you get from PvP doesn't help you very much in PvP any more than the PvE gear does. It's just unique looking, and it's not gear that drops in PvP. Which, again, they homogenized that in the past with Battle for Azeroth and made the gear sets just recolors. But rumor has it, in Shadowlands, we're getting distinct PvP gear sets again. So we'll see if that happens. But even if that doesn't, World of Warcraft, because of how its combat system works, has far better PvP than Final Fantasy XIV. So I'm obviously giving World of Warcraft the win here. And the fact that Blizzard got rid of PvP and PvE server distinctions and just straight up added a mode called War Mode, where if you turn War Mode on, you're flagged for PvP and can kill anybody else who has War Mode on the other faction. And if you have it off, you can't. You can't get ganked and shit like that in the open world. So it's up to you, and they do have incentive for having War Mode turned on. If you kill another player in the other faction that's been killing a lot of people, you get a bunch of rewards. Also, from everything you do, from quests to world quests, you know, to the standard stuff, you get 10% more rewards for having War Mode turned on because you're taking more of a risk. I think that was one of the best things they ever added to the game. So if your only interest in an MMORPG is PvP, there are even better ones in both these games, but I would say World of Warcraft, if all you care about is PvP, don't play Final Fantasy XIV. It won't be your cup of tea. Play World of Warcraft instead, or something else. All right, man. I'm about to blow another huge load in your face.
Oh my.
PvE and raiding. Another huge thing. You know, it's kind of the yin to PvP's yang. Both games have raids and dungeons and endgame PvE content. Otherwise, who the hell would play them? Let's start with Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV has normal and extreme difficulty trials, which is a boss for 8 players, and you can farm this to your heart's content on extreme and keep getting rewards. There's no lockout on it. You can continue to do it. And in general, the extreme trials drop weapons that are good, but not as good as the next tier up, and we'll get into that. For raids, we have normal and savage difficulty, which is also a set of 4 different bosses. There is no trash, just like in extremes, there's no trash to kill. You just fight a boss straight up, queue in, fight the boss, and there's normal and savage difficulty for it. Normal is not super easy, but it's not, you know, it's not brain dead easy, but it's not hard. I wouldn't call it hard by any stretch of the imagination. You can, in Final Fantasy XIV, you have, you know, there's an infinite amount of battle reses, and in normal modes for both trials and normal raids, there's no limit to how many times you can battle res, and it's very, very long DPS window. So you know, the enrage timer is very, very long. So yeah. It's pretty simple. Now, the Savage raids get way, 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 way harder. They're akin to mythic quality raids in World of Warcraft, which we'll get into that when we talk about World of Warcraft. But 4 bosses, no trash. And you can do them on Savage and normal while the content's relevant once a week. Each boss once a week can get loot from them. The 24-man raids that Final Fantasy XIV has it's a very long narrative, and they continue to add a 24-man raid every major patch to the story because it has its own complete side story that's separate from the main plot of the main game. And they're usually fantastic. Last expansion, Stormblood Return to Evil East, was a work of fucking art. One problem 24-man raids have, though, is generally speaking, the gear that comes out is irrelevant the day it's released because it's just not good. It's not on par with normal, or especially not on par with Savage raiding gear. Most people do the 24-man raids for the story and for getting items for glamour, or maybe some catch-up items for their other jobs that aren't their main jobs they play. But these dungeons have various amount of bosses and also have trash pulls like a standard MMORPG raid. The game has small dungeons for small groups. The small group in Final Fantasy XIV is 4 players. Those also usually pertain to the main storyline. They're linked in somehow to the main storyline for the most part. Not all of them, but most of them are. And they generally serve a purpose of dropping catch-up gear, and people still run them to cap out tomes. Sorry. So people say, what are tomes? Tomes is Final Fantasy XIV's raid gear RNG protection. So how it works is, let's say you want, the gloves from a Savage boss, and you kill that boss every week, but either they don't drop or they do drop and you don't win the roll. If you beat that boss X amount of times, every time you kill him, they drop a tome, and then you can use a certain amount of tomes to then buy the gloves that you weren't lucky enough to get. By the same token, you can save up a bunch of tomes from doing 4-man content, which, by the way, normal is the only difficulty that 4-man content has. You can blast through it super easy, brain dead, and you get a bunch of tomes, you save them up, and you can buy not the actual raid gear, but gear that has the same or very close to the same item level from a vendor, so you can still gear up, Savage raid level, all except for the weapon anyway, without ever stepping foot in a raid. Now, how boss fights work in raiding, as I said when we were talking about combat, Savage bosses, you typically memorize the entire fight, because most abilities, if not all the boss does, will one-shot you. When you're still on progression, if you one or more people die, it could mean you don't hit the enrage timer, because when you resurrect somebody, sure, you can res infinite amount of times, but every time you res, that player has a debuff where they lose quite a bit of their stats, and so their DPS is going to be trash for a minute. So, you have to really, really push hard, and it's, the enrage is very, very tight when you're on progression. Yeah, sure, eventually you outgear it, but how you outgear it is you kill it and make it skip phases of its fight, not necessarily don't get hit, or get hit, make a mistake, and survive. Now, one big problem I have with Final Fantasy XIV's raiding is, as I said before, it's because of the server tick in the combat, where you can't make really cool plays. You can in some jobs and in some situations, but it's rare. To where, like, for example, maybe as a Dark Knight, you can be like, hey, I've gained enough gear at this point that I can, use a cooldown here and stay in something I normally would have run out of, and it will be fine, or tank something for longer amount of stacks than I normally would have. And that's great. But what you can really never do is, if you make a mistake, you can never go, oh shit, I shouldn't have been hit by that, and I know I'm gonna get hit because my foot was still in the indication marker. So I'm gonna hit this cooldown, so when the hit comes in, I survive. You can't do that, because even if you hit the cooldown, the snapshot that was sent to the server didn't have your cooldown being used, so you're fucking dead anyway. So that really, really bothers me, and essentially you just memorize. Now, the Savage raids, you can pug if you want to. There's a huge party finder, that you can search through, and you can get it done. In fact, I cleared all Heaven's Word and Stormblood and the first tier of Shadowbringers all through Party Finder, just doing pug groups in Savage, and it was a soul-destroying experience, as many of you know from my Twitch streams. Anyway, yeah, that's pretty much how raiding works. It's not the greatest in the world, but is it bad? No, definitely not bad. It's different. It's quite different from WoW, which we're going to go into now. WoW raiding has several difficulties as well. LFR, looking for retards, looking for raid. Normal, heroic, mythic. All the raids have trash. There's always trash pulls in every difficulty of the raid. There's no exception there. One of the greatest things that Blizzard ever did, and it's probably one of the greatest systems ever, it's flex raiding. Now, how flex raiding works is unless you're doing Mythic, which requires 20 players, you have to have 20, no more, no less, to do Mythic raiding. In Heroic and Normal and LFR, the bosses in the group and all the trash scale to how many people you have in your party. So you can go in with a minimum of 10, maximum of 25. So yeah, I think it's one of the best systems ever. For flex rating is great. So if you have a smaller guild with just friends, you can only get together 10 people or 12 people. You know, you can't just say, oh, we have 12 people on, we can only take 10. No, you can take all 12 and it's just fine. The bosses will scale. Or, you know, we had a lot more people show up today. We have 17. They can all go. That's a really, really great system that encourages you to bring the player and not necessarily the job, and not adhere to what's meta quite as much. Well, in Final Fantasy XIV, a lot of groups strongly adhere to what's meta, even if they're fucking trash, and it wouldn't matter if they were meta or not, they're still going to wipe because they're garbage. So there's raiding there. There's also the small player content, which is island expeditions, which is something added in BFA, and it's fucking trash for the most part. It's just grindy and boring, in my opinion. There's a Mythic Plus, which this is the niche for the more casual player base in World of Warcraft, which is it's the regular 5-man dungeons with a Mythic difficulty where you can add keystones and ultimately scale up the difficulty with certain modifiers that are active that week. And the higher you go, the better the gear rewards are going to be that you actually get at the end of the dungeon, and the higher gear reward that you'll guaranteed to get at the end of the week when your chest respawns and gives you gear. The same thing works in PvP that way. The higher you get in your conquest points, it gives you a piece of gear at the beginning of next week. So yeah, there's quite a difference here. And this is, again, it's opinion, it's me personally. I think the raiding has always been WoW's strongest aspect since its inception in 2004. It's what keeps players in the game overall. I really wish Looking for LFR was never implemented, but you know, a lot of people agree with me, but we're not going to discuss that in this video. But World of Warcraft, in my opinion, hand over fist, is a better raiding PvE experience than Final Fantasy XIV. My biggest reasons being, I like that there's trash that you and your friends can bullshit, you know, in between boss fights. A lot of the raids you don't have to do the bosses in a certain order. You can pick and choose which ones you want to progress on at the start, or which ones you want to kill, you know, to get the raid done the quickest or whatever. While in Final Fantasy XIV, if you skip, like let's say you do the third boss, you don't get any loot that week from the first and second because you didn't kill those first in that order, which I think is really fucking retarded. In addition, Final Fantasy XIV's small man content, you know, four players, is irrelevant other than getting story, which, you know, great story, but other than just grinding out tomestones, it's useless. While Mythic Plus stays challenging the higher you go, gets quite hard, and gives you great rewards for it. So I would have to say World of Warcraft wins, no questions asked here. Okay, next up, this one will be short and sweet. I know the last one ran on, but this one will be short and sweet because it's a very simple decision. Crafting and player housing. Final Fantasy XIV wins. Moving on. No, I'll tell you why Final Fantasy XIV wins. Final Fantasy XIV wins crafting hands down because it's probably one of the best crafting systems ever put into an MMORPG. Granted, they did dumb it down a bit in the latest expansion, making it easier, but what you have to understand about Final Fantasy XIV is the crafting and profession jobs are classes all of themselves, the storylines all of themselves. You can be a crafter all the time if you want and make a fucking killing on the auction house doing it. It's just amazing how they do it. And then the crafting jobs are rebuilding what's it called? Ishgard from, you know, the castle city, one of my favorite cities in Final Fantasy XIV. In this expansion, the crafting professions are rebuilding it so that people can buy player housing there, which brings me to player housing, which is Final Fantasy XIV has it, and it's outstanding. It's amazing. It's gorgeous. You can have a house for your guild, your clan, your free company. You can have a house just all on your own. You can have an apartment. You can buy land. It's fucking fantastic. When you compare that to WoW, which has no player housing at all, the closest they ever got was in Warlords of Draenor, your garrison, which turned out to be a total fucking disaster because it pretty much pulled all the players out of the open world and even out of the major hub cities because everyone was just in their fucking garrison playing Facebook games, essentially. I'm so glad that was removed and we'll never see it again. But the professions in World of Warcraft have been quite stupid and dumbed down and useless for a long time. They have made some positive changes, such as not having to learn, Vanilla WoW, Burning Crusade, Wrath the Lich King, all of those patterns from the old expansions, unless there's a specific item you want in it from Transmog and you don't want to pay gold for it, you want to actually craft it yourself. But for the most part, the professions have been kind of pointless in World of Warcraft. Now, I've seen some patch notes for Shadowlands, and they're looking to change this quite a bit, bringing back certain things like oils for weapons and, certain crafting abilities you used to have, like repairs and things. They're bringing a lot of that back. So we'll see. But the bottom line is, even if they took World of Warcraft's professions back to the best they ever were, which in my opinion was somewhere around Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, it still wouldn't be as good as Final Fantasy XIV's. It'll just be acceptable again. So Final Fantasy XIV wins in this department, hands on. The only question you have to ask is, does the player housing and all of that affect one of the things that makes Final Fantasy XIV's open world dead? Because people are in their player housing. Who's to say? I don't know. I am overall a big, proprietor for please have player housing in MMORPGs. It's a wonderful thing. Even Assurance Call had it back in the day. World of Warcraft doesn't have any excuse of not having it. Final Fantasy XIV wins this. Yeah, WoW's fucking trash at this. Okay, I know this has been a long fucking video, but this is the last point I want to hit, which kind of covers a bit of everything. Endgame overall. Now, when we're talking about endgame overall in both of these games, you have to ask yourself, who is the target audience? And the thing is, all MMORPGs have the same target audience, which is the vast majority of their player base, the casual people. The people, that aren't interested in hardcore bleeding edge raiding or PvP, that just log in and fuck around. But they still want to feel competitive. And this has always been a very hard thing for MMOs and games in general, is because people feel entitled to the same rewards as somebody who puts in shitloads of hours and does the hardest content in the game, which I think is fucking bullshit. If you think this way, I don't give a fuck if you paid the same price as I did. We have the same opportunities. I'm a huge, advocator for equality of opportunity. I'm not a huge, I'm not about equality of outcome. You have the same, if we both pay the same price for the game, $60, $40, whatever, then yeah, we start out on equal playing field. It's not my fault you don't want to play as much as me, or vice versa, and get the same rewards. So let's just stop that right there. If you think you should get all the same shit someone who plays a lot does, way more than you and is way better than you at the game because they invested more time, and you think you should just be given that, then you should go, fucking eat a glass shard sandwich and wash that shit down with some Drano, all right? Or some toilet duck. Fuck you.
Wow, what do you say after that one? Brutal, savage, wrecked, absolutely taken down.
Anyway, off my rant. So the casual crowd, everybody. Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, though, has very different casual players. Final Fantasy XIV's casuals are more about the cosmetics, weeb culture, anime culture, which is why, they're really into decorating their player house or getting all the coolest looking glamour, or, spending a fortune on that type of stuff, or role playing in the game, stuff like that. And some of those aspects and avenues they can explore as casual players in Final Fantasy XIV are avenues that World of Warcraft doesn't have. While casuals in World of Warcraft generally tend to do, they stay out of the mythic raiding, they stay out of, the high-end competitive PvP, but they do mythic plus, fucking around with toggling war mode on and off, and if they want to try dipping their toes in some PvP, just doing standard battlegrounds, role-playing as well. Some of them do role-play and shit like that as well, though it's not as common as it is in Final Fantasy XIV. Being sexual deviants in Goldshire, things like that.
Hell yeah. This is the... Oh, yeah. Oh. Ah.
But either way, the bleeding edge in both these communities is a small percentage of the community. And so Blizzard is going to put their money and their development time more towards content that pleases the casuals. which is why we've seen a huge development in 4-man content like Mythic Plus since Legion, and turning PvP off and on, things like that. While in Final Fantasy XIV, that's why you see, people, Square spending their money and their resources on, quality of life improvements for housing and decorating your house and adding more things to put in your house and adding more glamour options and, more story. Because a lot of people just play Final Fantasy XIV straight for the story and story only. So they put in a lot of side stories, like the Hashinfra or whatever his fucking name is. Side quests or whatever. Like they do this kind of thing, adding in music scrolls that you can play on your music box in your house, things like that. That's where a lot of the money goes. And it's no secret too. It's very obvious to figure this out on your own. If you go, both games have a store. WoW, you can actually get to in-game. Square's, you can't. You have to go on their website to the MOG station and look. But if you look, there are hundreds, if not approaching 1,000 items on the MOG station, and all of them are cosmetic or mounts. They're all cosmetics, because that's where they're going to make their money. That's the majority of their player base. Is how they try to tempt them to spend more money, is because that's what the majority of their player base is interested in, what they look like, things like that. While with WoW, there's not near as many things on WoW's store. There's some battle pets, there's some mounts, and there's leveling skips, and collector's editions of the game. And the things on WoW store are very, very much higher priced than the things on, Final Fantasy XIV store. But Final Fantasy XIV has thousands of things to choose from, hundreds to thousands, while WoW has, I think, less than 30 things in total. But they're all expensive because they're just geared towards different player bases. Sure, the casual in WoW might spend that money on a pet or a mount because they do some battle pet shit. But they're going to be like, oh, I don't want to level up a character. I'll just buy a character boost. Boom. While with Final Fantasy XIV, I want these cute Moogle slippers or whatever the fuck, and they'll buy that kind of stuff. Or I want a mount that carries more than one person. So they'll buy that off the store. That's how you can tell how different the casual player base is in each game. So I would say if you have to decide when you're picking between these two games and you're like, which one should I play? I would highly recommend play what you like. Play both. That's what I'm doing right now. I play Final Fantasy XIV mainly for the story because I fucking love the story in the game. Which now it's kind of become a very expensive single player experience. But I play WoW for the raiding and the PvP and to fuck around with friends. I used to hardcore bleeding edge raid and PvP in WoW, and I used to hardcore bleeding edge raid in Final Fantasy XIV. I don't do either anymore. I just want to have fun and have a good time. And right now, lately, I've actually been having more fun in World of Warcraft than Final Fantasy XIV because I feel there's more to do at Endgame for what my tastes and what I like to do, which is higher in Mythic Plus and, heroic raids is enough for me. PvPing with my old friends from the past and just fucking around, that type of stuff. Teaching people raid encounters in the game while talking shit on trash pulls. That's what I'm into. So you have to decide what kind of player you are to decide which kind of game you're going to enjoy more. And with Shadowbringers is an exceptional expansion. And with the patches and changes to the leveling system that are coming up, and of course with the addition of continuing to add more in-game content like they do in their regular patch cycle like they have since 2.0, and the amazing storyline, it's a good choice. With World of Warcraft, with all we've learned so far from Shadowlands, which could end up being shit because, come on, it's Blizzard and we know their track record. But if it pans out, it could be fucking great. I mean, anything's better than BFA at this point. So it could be quite amazing with them removing a lot of the RNG from gearing and having it go back to BIS lists, to adding back conquest vendors and points for more choice to PvP, again, less RNG, having focused non-RNG related legendaries you can get from Torghast, and Torghast itself being a feature, and unpruning of classes. It's shaping up to be quite good. So at the end of the day, my conclusion is it all depends on what you want your MMO experience to be, what you want to go for and what interests you, because where Final Fantasy XIV is very strong, WoW is weak, and in my opinion, vice versa. A lot of stuff that's very strong about WoW is where Final Fantasy XIV has a weakness. What would be great is if both learned from that, i.e. Blizzard added in, you know, better professions. Blizzard added in player housing with the same level of talent that Final Fantasy XIV has. Fat fucking chance, I know. If Final Fantasy XIV added meaningful 24-man raid and 4-man content, unfortunately, they can never fix the server tick issue because it's kind of built into the engine. It had to be because of Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was still partially part of the foundation of this game. And that's just how the server works. There's no getting around that. But anyway, guys, that's the end of my series. So tell me what you guys think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think I should fuck myself? Because I probably have already by this point. But anyway, guys, this has been Raziel. Please check me out on Twitch. I try to stream several times a week. Last week, I was gone all week out of town after I made the last video. But I am back streaming this week. So please, if you see me online, come say hi. I always announce here on my YouTube video. So hit the alert. You know, if you're subscribed, if you like my content. If you don't, go fuck off. I don't care. But hit the alert bell so you know, because I do post here and in my Discord when I'm going live on Twitch. And here's my Twitch on the screen now. But thanks you guys so much for the support. I love you. And as always, keep it real.